بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. I hope everyone's well, inshallah. We're entering we've entered the second phase of Ramadan. So inshallah everyone is well, healthy, and doing the best that you can to enjoy this month, inshallah, given the constraints that we're all under, and where we don't have access to a masjid. We're doing our best to make our homes into masjids. So if you get a chance, try and pray at home with your families. Try and do jama'ah. It's a good chance for everyone to kind of bond and connect. So try and make the most of this opportunity, inshallah. And we're probably not going to get a Ramadan like this, ever again. Hopefully we don't get something, this sort of thing never comes around again. But in terms of where we're with our families and we're having to be kind of innovative, this is a once in a lifetime. So every hardship brings about some kind of silver linings, and the silver lining for us is that we can all spend time with our families. So do make the most of it, inshallah. So we left off last week. I've put a mark here, and it's in blazing yellow, so I can't really miss it. First, Muradu min al-dhikr hudur al-qalb. He says the purpose of dhikr is to have presence of heart. He says فَيَنْبَغِي أَنْ يَكُونَ هُوَ مَقْصُودُ الذَّاكِرِ. That's what your objective should be when you're doing dhikr, meaning it's not just the words that you say, it's trying to be as present as you can be. There is a tendency to put a lot of weight on the amount of dhikr that we do, the amount of reading that we do, the amount of Quran that we read, and so on. But actually the real the gain is in doing putting as much heart into something as possible. So even if it means you do a small amount of dhikr, but you try to, and it's, all of us have different thresholds as to how long we can cope. But as long as you try and be as focused as possible, then that's more than enough. It's a bit like you can approach doing dhikr like going to the gym. Because for a long time, people thought going to the gym and trying to get, for the men in particular, it's trying to get a bit of mass on and try to get as muscular as possible, meant you try and, hit the running machines and run for days on end. And that for a lot of people puts them off. And I think the same is true for dhikr, that if the perception is that the amount of dhikr is the measure of success, then it's not quite right. It does from the outside look like someone's doing something right, like somebody who just runs on the treadmill 5 days a week. But actually there's a lot of research that says it's not the amount of exercise that you do, it's the quality of the exercise, or more specifically, it's the amount of it's the strain, it's the tensing of the muscles. It's actually the more tension you can put under your muscles and the longer you can hold that for, the more you activate them. And then even after you've completed your exercise, your body carries on in its recuperation, it carries on exercising. So really it's how do you convert 15 minutes of exercise into 24 hours of exercise. So either you can do 3 hours on the treadmill, or you find out a way of making it a good 15 minutes that are effective, which means your body carries on doing the equivalent of that for the next 3 to 4 hours. So you get far more gain in the quality. I think that's the case for dhikr, in that we shouldn't be chasing after doing, hours and hours of dhikr. Although we should try and fill as much of our time with dhikr, but that's more about, it's more about giving yourself it's trying to make the most of your time. It's assuming that actually whatever it is that whatever you are occupying yourself with other than dhikr would not be good for you, wouldn't be as an effective use of your time. If it is, then of course you put your mind to that. I remember one, I heard from who was it said this? I was in Sheikh Aslam's house, actually. I was in Sheikh Aslam's house. This is going back a good few years ago now. This is when he first came back from Syria, and I'll never forget this. And one of the pieces of something that he said to me, he said back in the Ma'had al-Fath in Damascus, he said if any of the students had their tasbih, the sibha, and they were doing their awrad, they were reading, some sort of dhikr, one of the teachers would shout at them and tell them to put it away. And he himself was a very pious man. This teacher that would tell them off. He said he'd tell them off and he'd say, "Talibul ilm, ilmuhu wirduhu." He said when it comes to the student of knowledge, his knowledge is his wird, it's his litany. So you need to the ilm al-hal is extremely important, which is knowing what's important in the moment. So dhikr in the grand scheme of things is extremely important if we take it to mean just litanies. But if we kind of open that meaning up as the Sheikh does and make it any state whereby God is in this equation, whatever it is that you're doing, you've included God into it, and that's a form of dhikr. When that happens, then what you do is you prioritize as to what is the right type of dhikr to be doing at that particular time. And the way I see it is, if somebody is speaking to you, and I've been around people that have done this, where they've got a sibha in their hand, and when you're talking to them, they're doing dhikr and with a tasbih. Now, different people will see that differently, but my perspective would be that actually, if you're speaking to somebody who's doing that, especially if you don't know much about dhikr, or if somebody's not a Muslim, that may appear to be very rude. It may appear to be very rude. That actually what you should do, and people can differ on this, and that's fine. But if you go to what the sunnah is that you give your complete attention to somebody. So actually the form of dhikr there is to stop. Your dhikr is in stopping for the sake of fulfilling the sunnah of completely giving your attention to somebody, rather than continuing to do it, because from that person's perspective it might be good, but actually from the person listening, it might be misconstrued as though they're not paying attention. So it's important to do dhikr, but it's also important to recognize the situation that you're in and to do dhikr accordingly. It's important to to consider the amount of dhikr that we do in our life, but it's more important to focus on the quality of the dhikr, and the quality of the dhikr is not based on the amount of dhikr that you do, or as I mentioned last week, it's not about having some entering this this state, this kind of state that people like to describe as hal, whereby you're completely, you enter a higher state of consciousness and you're not aware of what's happening around you. And you may see things like this, those of you who've been to gatherings may see people entering into these states and so on. And there's difference even amongst the scholars, that they differ as to whether this is something that's just is this a spiritual state, or is this something else? Is this their mind? Is this the kind of their psyche? And there's an example. Imam Malik radiallahu an, somebody once told him, Sheikh Abdul Fattah Abu Ghudda mentions this actually. He says there was who's a great muhaddith, a hadith scholar. He says a man once, in the presence of Imam Malik radiallahu an, told him about these people who entered these fanatical states, these states of fana, annihilation, where they will just start getting up and start start dancing and doing all sorts of things. And and he says that Imam Malik said, "Is this true?" And he said, "Yes." And Imam Malik, he said, started laughing. And he said he laughed so much that he literally put his head on the wall, and he just continued to laugh until he left the room. And he said he never saw Imam Malik laugh like that before, because he was quite a serious character, and it wasn't of the adab of the, it wasn't the way of the ulama to be laughing and kind of being, being jovial, but not to that extent where they completely laugh you out the room. But he did that because he found it so ridiculous. So my point isn't to dismiss that sort of mindset. My point is just to say that, look, these things did were differed upon, and have there been debates about this for many a millennia, and it comes down to so you may come across these things, but we don't take, I guess that's down to our personal kind of preference. If that's a sort of gathering that you're interested in, you find that these things are appealing to you, then you can go to these gatherings, and you can certainly benefit from them, and you can learn about what these states are like. But equally, we've got to be careful that there are a lot of charlatans out there that monopolize on these sorts of things, and appeal to your desire and need to we all believe, we all have this sense of iman, and because iman is a very intangible thing, what we want to do is, it's human nature that we want to grab onto something that almost evidences the unseen for us, which is why we put so much thought, and we put so much kind of emphasis on miracles, and why when we hear about spirituality, it's so attractive, and when we hear about people performing miracles, it's so attractive, because what it does is it almost acts as the proof that we need that there is more to than just the physical. So we find these things attractive, and there are people out there that take advantage of this, and there's lots of examples that I've encountered in my own life. I've had students come to me and ask me about things that people have been practicing these things, and as I've said a couple of times in this class, and I think it's important to emphasize these, is that your marker should always be the Sharia. Your marker as to what's right and what's wrong should always be the Quran, the Sunnah, and going to somebody who is, a scholar, and asking them, is this something that is acceptable in the Sharia? Now, more often than not, it may be within the bounds of the Sharia, and then you've got to make a judgment call as to whether if this is something for you or not. But on occasion, it isn't within the bounds of Sharia, and there are lots of examples that you can probably just Google and hear about. But there are also plenty of examples in Birmingham of people that have taken advantage of, especially sick people. So these things are, can be monopolized. And I remember my own teacher, Sheikh Rasul Saidi. I remember speaking to him about this. I said, "Look, what's your view on people who enter this hal, this state, and what do you say about it?" And he, what I meant by that was not that I don't believe in it, but more, what's your thoughts on it? I was just kind of interested in his reflection. And he says, he said in I'm kind of paraphrasing here, but what it came down to was, we believe that it's possible that someone could enter that state. He said, however, he said, the test is, if you were to put that person on top of a mountain, would he have enough control not to fall off? He said, because the reality is, a lot of people that enter these states, he said, will seem as though they are completely not in control and they've entered this way. But if you put them on top of a mountain, they'll know exactly what they're doing. And I think his point was that there are a lot of charlatans out there, and a lot of people that can be sucked into this mindset innocently. Some people are just very suggestible, and these things can certainly happen. And the other thing he said was, if somebody truly went into that state, he said, did they do wudu before they prayed? So he's a scholar at the end of the day. So his next point was, he said, if they've entered this state, then they're not in control of their senses, and if they're not in control of their senses, then actually that's one of the things that breaks your wudu in the Hanafi madhab. He said, so do they do their wudu again? And I said, the ones I've seen don't. And he said, well, okay, maybe that's what you want to mention to them. So again, it comes back to the Sharia, which is you measure people, you measure these things against the Sharia. Yes, you can do this if you so wish, but actually, what does your madhab say about kind of the validity of your wudu in that particular case? وَيَتَدَبَّرُ مَا يَذْكُرُ, and one should reflect on what they read, and يَتَعَقَّلْ مَعْنَاهُ, and try and understand its meanings. So this is something I'd encourage everyone to do. Try it, do your best to, if you know a bit of Arabic, then excellent. Practice it, use it. Look at translations of what it is that you're reading. And if you don't know Arabic, then it's fine. You don't have to necessarily go on a journey to learn Arabic. You can look for a translation, and then you'll know the meaning, just associate the meaning with the word. Um, and those of you who have a desire to then take the plunge, think about it, ask yourself, is it something you can commit to? And then find an organization, and we're one organization that offers Arabic courses, but we're not the only one. So find the one that's suitable for you. Um, and for that you can get in touch with us, inshallah. Our email address is info@sacredtext.co.uk. And then just, if you describe what it is that you're looking for, then if we can offer that, then we'll suggest it, and if not, then we'll hopefully signpost you to someone who can. That's if you're people that are, if you're interested in studying Arabic, or if you know of people that are studying Arabic. So there is one great benefit in having learned, or having, studying Arabic, in that you can read something and you can immediately understand it. And one of my friends actually, yesterday, he was telling me how he read the whole of, he called me a few days back and said, he said, throughout the whole of Ramadan, he said, for the last 40 days now, I've not missed a single prayer. And he was so excited about it, and I was really excited about it too. And and now he said, I want to read a translation of the Quran. And I said, well, Abdul Halim's translation is very good. Read that. And he said, oh, that happens to be the one that I just I'd come across on Amazon, so I picked it up. So he said that was the one he happened upon. So and then yesterday I spoke to him, and he said how he'd read the whole translation of the Quran from cover to cover, and he really enjoyed it. And he said something interesting to me. He said one of his drivers for wanting to read the Quran is, he said, we go through, I was born a Muslim, and he said it almost felt incidental that we are Muslims. He was kind of communicating, explaining this to me, and how we never once think that actually, if we're Muslims, how on earth have we not read the Book of God? How is it possible that we believe in something and yet we've never read it? And we may have read it in English, but in Arabic, but not understood it. Because when we think of reading, I mean, how often do you read something and not understand it and consider it acceptable? Like if you were given a piece of work from university, and would you just say, if someone said, have you read it, would you read that as, would you interpret that as, they mean, have you just read it regardless of whether you've understood it or not? Would you interpret it as, have I understood it? So in most cases, you'd base it on whether you've understood it or not. And yet we've just kind of accepted it as something that we just don't understand. We just read it. And that was a bit of an eye-opener for him, and he really enjoyed it. So he read the whole Quran, and that inspired him to go on and read other books. And he's already, and we're talking in the space of a few days, he's already picked up other books that have kind of he's found really interesting. And he got me interested, because he started reading some other books just about some of the journeys of the prophets and some of the history behind it. And I thought, oh, this is, and then he's telling me about books that he's reading. So I'm now interested. I want to read it. So it's amazing how these things can just, how these things can take off. So those of you who don't know Arabic, or don't have a particular desire to learn Arabic, you should still make an effort to read the Quran in English and try and connect to it. And you'll be amazed at actually how much understanding you gain from it. Yeah, it will be an interpretation of somebody, but nonetheless, it'll be far better than not reading any of the English at all. So I would slow down, read small amount of Arabic, and certainly read English with it. Don't just content yourself with reading the Arabic through the month. Yeah, try and do a bit of English with it too. فينبغي أن يكون مقصود فالتدبر في الذكر مطلوب كما هو مطلوب في القراءة لاشتراكهما في المعنى المقصود، ولهذا كان المذهب الصحيح المختار استحباب مد الذاكر قول لا إله إلا الله. And I spoke about this last week actually. وأقوال السلف وأئمة الخلف في هذا مشهورة. And there are many opinions, and you can find aqwal, which are a plural of qawl, which means words, or kind of views of the Salaf. And the Salaf are the first three generations of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So, it's the generation of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then those who come after, and then those who came after them. So they're called the Salaf. ثم الذين يلونهم ثم الذين يلونهم. There's a hadith where the Prophet said, خير القرون قرني ثم الذين يلونهم ثم الذين يلونهم. The best of nations is, or the best of centuries is my generation, then the generation that comes after me, and then the generation that comes after that. And they've taken on this kind of laqab, this title of the Salaf. So anyone who lives within those three generations are known as the Salaf. And the Khalaf, therefore, everyone that come after that period. So all the founders of the four madhabs, for example, all fall within this the Salaf. They call the Salaf. وأقوال السلف وأئمة الخلف في هذا مشهورة. This is all well known. والله أعلم. Sheikh says, and Allah knows best. What he means by this is there are many hadith on and lots of kind of aqwal of the scholars about the importance of the dhikr la ilaha illallah, and also how you go about it. And what they all can pretty much agree on is that you emphasize the elongations, la ilaha illallah. And what that does is by elongating it, you spend more time. It gives you more time to reflect on the words that you're reading. Yeah, so that's the point. So when you don't just say Allah, 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 but you say Allah, Allah. So it kind of it buys you the time for you to reflect on the words as you're saying them. Yeah. So La ilaha illallah was it's mustahab, which means it's recommended to elongate this dhikr and say La ilaha illallah, and not to elongate the lower bit. So you don't say la ila, you don't say the e bit. You just say the la. The emphasis is on the extension, not on the ya, or converting a kasra into a ya, a zer into a ya. So you don't say la ila, you say la ila. So you kind of go straight up to the ilaha illallah. And the Khalaf and the Salaf would all say the La ilaha illallah it embodies all of the deen, is kind of captured in this one statement of La ilaha illallah. And what they mean by that is, firstly, when you say La ilaha illallah, there is no God but Allah, the implicit in this is that you also accept the second part of the statement, which is Muhammadur Rasulullah. So when you say La ilaha illallah, the implicit in this is that one accepts the end, which is Muhammadur Rasulullah. And amongst the hadith on this, and there are quite a few, one of the hadith is narrated by Sayyidina Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, Man qala la ilaha illallah dakhala al-jannah. Whoever says La ilaha illallah will enter paradise. And that's seen as the kind of the final statement on this La ilaha illallah, which is that shows you, demonstrates the power of this word, this formulation La ilaha illallah. But the Khalaf had a lot to say on this, which is, does that then mean just the formulation La ilaha illallah, just saying those words are enough for someone to be in paradise? So can somebody spend their entire life rejecting God, and then at the end, on their last breath, they say La ilaha illallah, that they'll have paradise? And this is where they all had lots of debates on this. And the first thing is, simply saying La ilaha illallah and not knowing what it means, is it enough? Yeah. Someone can say that and not know what it means. For example, in medieval Spain, when the Muslims were exiled, removed from Spain by Queen Isabella and Ferdinand, at that time they destroyed a lot of the Muslim architecture, but they really liked the masjids. They really liked some of the calligraphy. Now, there's a difference of opinion as to whether the Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand knew what was written. Maybe they didn't know what the wording was. They probably didn't realize it was calligraphy. They just thought they were designs. So what they did was they kept some of that calligraphy, and they converted these masjids into churches. So to this day, in parts of Spain, you can go and you can see, like Toledo, for example, where there was some of the great churches there. They destroyed the masjid and they replaced it. For the most part, they replaced it and they converted it into a church. but you still have churches that have La ilaha illallah written there. You still have churches that say Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. You still have the Muslim kind of articulation of faith. You still have the in the name of Allah, the most merciful, the most compassionate, written in some of these in these churches. Now, given what they did to the Muslims, given the amount of bloodshed that took place, given the torture that the Muslims went through, the Inquisition that happened, where people had to prove that they weren't Muslim. And one of the things that they would do is they would, you would have to hang some pork outside of your house as a sign that you weren't Muslim. Otherwise, you risked being punished. And if any of the police suspected that you were Muslim, they could force you to eat some pork to test your faith. So that's the kind of inquisition that they had, went through. Did they know what La ilaha illallah meant? I doubt it. Highly doubt it. The fact that they read it, left it there, is that enough to say people who were able to recite it, maybe they were able to recite it not knowing what it meant? Does that mean that somehow you fall under this hadith? No. In order to fall under this hadith, La ilaha illallah, to believe in La ilaha illallah means to believe in everything that stands for. And what that stands for is, first and foremost, the second part of that sentence, which is that Muhammadur Rasulullah, that in order for La ilaha illallah to be effective as a savior for us, as to fall under this hadith, we have to accept the second part of it, which is Muhammadur Rasulullah. And that's necessarily the case, because otherwise the hadith has no value. Right, the hadith "Man qala la ilaha illallah dakhala al-jannah" has no value if you don't accept the Prophet ﷺ as a messenger. Why would you accept his words? So, in order to initiate La ilaha illallah and the power of La ilaha illallah, it means you have to accept the Muhammadur Rasulullah, which is so. If there are non-Muslims who enjoy the recitation of La ilaha illallah and constantly recite it, and yet they don't believe in Allah and His Messenger, they just like the way it's pronounced, that's not equivalent to faith. That doesn't mean they have iman. It also means, if you accept then the first part of the shahad, La ilaha illallah, it necessarily means that you reject everything and anything that of having anything else as a deity except Allah. So you reject anything else as a deity except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you accept, through that second formulation, you accept, which is implicit within La ilaha illallah, you accept within that if the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the messenger of God, you have to accept the book that came with it. Yeah, because the Prophet, if he is the messenger of God, then he brought a book. So we have to accept the book. And if it means accepting the book, which is the Quran, you have to accept the message, which is everything within the Quran. So that then forces us to believe in Allah, in the messenger and the messengers, that we believe in the angels, which is what the Quran testifies to. We have to believe in the last day. We have to believe in the predestiny, in qadar, khayrihi wa sharrihi. So we have to believe in all of these things, and all of that is captured. The whole of faith is captured in this one formulation, La ilaha illallah. So when we reflect on this, when we say La ilaha illallah, we have to approach it as though this formula carries within it everything that we believe about our Lord, about our Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, our book, the Quran, and all the previous books and messengers that were sent before them. So we have to accept all of that, and all of that is captured in this formulation of La ilaha illallah. And also, in terms of the wording, this La ilaha is this negation. It's a complete negation. It comes for nafyul jins. Nafyul jins in Arabic means to negate anything that has anything which falls in the genus of a deity. In this case, La ilaha, anything that could be called an ilah is completely negated, right? So this is called the khalli. The khalli is this removal of any trace or trait that is harmful. So la ilaha is to remove anything that that has any kind of that is can be treated as a deity. Deity meaning a god. Illallah is the confirmation of once you have a free vessel that's free of anything that because la ilaha also means not just anything that is God, but anything that can distract you from God. Yeah. So it means anything that is treated like a God. So that means anything that distracts us from God is itself a form of deification of that thing, like wealth, like money. Like money is, as somebody once said, your is your money. If you what you worship is what you ultimately kind of bow your head to completely. What you bow yourself to completely. And the thing is, we may physically bow for God, but actually if we submit everything about us, if we completely lose ourselves just because we've lost some money or because of some feud over money, then it means that we're kind of prostrating to money. So actually what our God is who we bow ourselves to, as in completely submit to. And complete submission isn't just the sajda. In fact, the sajda is the sign of submission. It's not submission, is the optimal sign of submission, right? It's called complete, this complete inhina. They say it's the complete ikmal tawadu. It's the completion of submission and humility before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it indicates your state before God. And I say that because somebody can prostrate before God but not believe in God, right? Someone can prostrate and go into the position of prostration and yet not believe in God at all. The hypocrites did this, and people today would probably do it. Other religions might have a form of prostration. It doesn't mean they're prostrating towards God, because they're not completely humble to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They haven't submitted to the true God. So it's an indication. So therefore, when we say prostrating or submitting or bowing ourselves to something, that's the God we bow to completely, and we've got to ask ourselves, which God is that? So la ilaha, that first formulation, la ilaha of illallah, is to remove anything that distracts us from God completely. This is called takhalli. And then it's to replace that with everything that reminds you of God, that you fill it with God, which is tahalli. Tahalli. Takhalli is to remove, and tahalli is to fill. So if you see the heart as a vessel, then tahalli is the idea that we're filling it with God and everything that represents God, everything that reminds us of God, right? So that's tahalli. And actually, when you remove all those negative traits and you fill them with all the positive traits of connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then the next stage in that is called tajalli. Tajalli is the manifestation of kind of pure belief and connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All of that is supposed to be captured by La ilaha illallah. And those who speak in these terms, takhalli, tahalli, and tajalli, say takhalli is the first part, La ilaha, and tahalli is illallah, and tajalli is Muhammadur Rasulullah, which is the manifestation of pure belief, is complete submission to God through his messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which is believing and acting upon the way of Muhammad as the messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There's a narration of Sayyidina Umar. So the Shaykh says, ينبغي لمن كان له وظيفة من الذكر في وقت من ليل أو نهار أو عقب الصلاة أو حالة من الأحوال ففاتته أو يتداركها أن يتداركها ويأتي بها إذا تمكن منها ولا يهملها، فإنه إذا اعتاد الملازمة عليها لم يعرض للتفويت، وإذا تساهل في قضائها سهل عليه تضييعها في وقتها. The Sheikh says that it's important that whenever you have any sort of dhikr, any sort of wazifa, right? He used the word wazifa here. So any litany, anything that you do regularly, which is a good thing to do, any good action that you do. He said in the day or the night, he said it's important that you do your best to maintain it. You have to do your best to maintain it, whether it be in the night or in the day or after the salah, or whatever state. Oh, hala min al ahwal. He says if you were to miss it, ya fafatatu, He said, what you should do is yatadaraka, so you should try your best to quickly catch it up. And he said, he said he should try and fulfill it, but don't he said don't delay it. Yeah, don't delay it. Don't hasten the act and don't delay fulfilling it. Yeah, he says فَإِنَّهُ إِذَا اعْتَادَ الْمُلَازَمَ عَلَيْهَا. He says, because if somebody has a habit that they've continuously doing over and over again, he said don't allow yourself. He said don't give yourself the don't allow yourself to destroy it or waste it. Yeah, he says, because if you do tasahul means you've become complacent. If you become complacent in catching it up, he said, then wasting it will become easy for you. Right? Wasting it will become easy for you. In other words, if you do something regularly, don't give yourself the excuse that you do it all the time anyway. One day won't cause any harm. Missing it once won't cause any harm. So don't give yourself that excuse, because that's exactly what it is, an excuse. And the problem with excuses like that is that they're never contained in that moment. What they do is you bank them as something you can use again. And it just becomes easier and easier and easier to dismantle this good deed. Because it starts off with, oh, I'm only missing it once, to I've only missed it twice this week. Or the moment you miss something once, you've already opened up a gaping hole in this now, because you've gone from something being completely watertight. There was no way you were going to miss it. The moment you missed it once, the difference between never missing it and missing it once is huge, because now what you've done is you opened the possibility up. And that's the thing. Once you open the possibility to something, you're already on a losing battle, and you have to work very hard to prevent that from happening. And to give you an example, it just kind of popped into my head was they say I think it's Imam Nawawi actually that says something similar to this. They say that the door to backbiting is to ask how so and so person is. So the door, Imam al-Muhasibi says it. In fact, Imam al-Muhasibi said the door to all backbiting, the door to all harm is to say, how is so and so? And what he meant by that was, he says, when you're sitting with a group of friends and somebody's not there, and you say, oh, person X isn't here, how are they? Or where are they? Right? The moment you've opened up a conversation about somebody who's not present, you've immediately opened the door to backbiting about them. You may not backbite about them, and you may not have that intention in that moment, but the moment you've done it, the moment they've entered the conversation without physically being present, you've now opened up a door that wasn't open before. Yeah. So it's the idea that the moment you open this door, you've immediately become susceptible, and you've put yourself at risk. In the same way, the moment you open up this door to missing something, you've put yourself at a lot of risk. And what you've got to do is slowly close that door back up again, to the point where you almost forget the fact that you miss it. So that's why it's important that we don't just treat it as a trivial thing, just that we've not fulfilled something. And that could be anything. So what is a wazifa in that context? Then a wazifa would therefore isn't just to do dhikr. The way I read this is not to say, just simply say Allah, Allah. It's something like, if you call your parents every day, right? If you're not living with your parents, you call them every single day, and you miss one day. Don't be laxed in. Don't see it as only one day. Make an effort that following morning, call them, and then call them again that evening. So something that you do regularly, just repeat it. Don't allow yourself to open up that door to, oh, I'm missing one day a week won't make a difference. If you go to see your parents every single week, if you meet up with your friends once a week, obviously within limits, if you go to see them once a week, and that's your chance to spend time with your friends, and the 1 week you can't make it, just be conscious of it. Be conscious of it and try and make an effort. Can we meet up on another day or something like that? Because these are all it's very easy to fall into a habit of where we become complacent, and we start taking almost you could say taking advantage of these situations, thinking that somehow they'll come around again, and sometimes they don't. So Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, he said, Man nama an hizbihi. This is mentioned in Sahih Muslim. This hadith narration in Sahih Muslim, where Sayyidina Umar said, Man nama an hizbihi, whoever falls asleep having not completed a portion of the Quran, or an shay'in minhu, or anything that they're reciting from the Quran. Yeah, whatever it is that they're reciting from the Quran. فَقَرَأَهُ مَا بَيْنَ صَلَاةِ الْفَجْرِ وَصَلَاةِ الظُّهْرِ, and you make a point of, meaning you missed it that night. So because you missed it, you really want to make sure you read it. So he says فَقَرَأَهُ, and then you recite it between Fajr and Dhuhr, meaning in the morning, first thing. كُتِبَ لَهُ كَأَنَّمَا قَرَأَهُ مِنَ اللَّيْلِ, it will be written for him as a good deed, as though he had recited the Quran at the time he wanted to recite it. Yeah. In other words, if you make a point of catching something up that you've missed, Allah will reward you as though you never missed it in the first place. فصل في أحوال تعرض للذاكر يستحب له قطع الذكر بسببها ثم يعود إليه بعد زوالها. This next bit in the preamble of the Shaykh is, and we're kind of coming close to the end now, so hopefully by today we would have finished these introductory remarks, and he goes on to his first bab, which is on the benefit of dhikr, and then he goes straight into clothing, which is starting your day, putting your clothes on, and gives some adhkar relating to that. So في أحوال تعرض للذاكر. So some examples of things that naturally would happen in your day when it's recommended to actually stop doing dhikr. And one of those that he mentions is it's recommended to stop doing dhikr. So if you're doing your revision, to stop doing your revision. If you're reading some salawat or some azkar, to stop doing those if somebody gives you salam. If somebody gives you salam, it's wajib, and wajib means that it is obligatory for us to respond to that salam. It's a emphasized sunnah to give salam whenever you walk into the room. It's an emphasized sunnah to give salam to people. It's seen as the Prophet ﷺ was emphatic about the role that salam plays in a Muslim's life. Yeah. In fact, there's a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said, and this is mentioned in various works, including I think it's in Abu Dawood, and I believe it's in Sahih Muslim, that the Prophet ﷺ was asked, what's the best way we can deal with people? What's the best thing that we can do for people? And the Prophet said, Afshu salam, at'imu ta'am wa afshu salam. He said the things that you should do for people is that you should feed them and you should give them salam. Feed them and give them salam. Yeah. So the salam was emphasized in terms of the role that it plays in a Muslim's life. And it's important, and it's interesting how salam and it'am, like feeding people and giving them salam, are mentioned, together. Even in when the Muslims went to Medina, and the Prophet stood up and on the minbar, and he told people to advised people. He said similar words to them. Afshu salam wa at'imu ta'am. وقوموا في الليل والناس نيام تدخل الجنة مع السلام أو كما قال صلى الله عليه وسلم. He said when he arrived in Medina, he looked to his congregation and he said, spread peace, spread salam, and feed people, meaning give people, don't allow people in your community to suffer if you can do something about it. أطعم الطعام, and stand in the prayer when everybody else sleeps, meaning in your personal time with God, don't forget Allah. And so make sure you pray, but quietly when nobody else is there. In your own time at night, do your prayer. And then he says at the end, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and you will enter the garden with salam. So Allah will, salamun qawlun min Rabbir Rahim. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran that those who enter paradise, they will enter and they will hear this word salam. The first thing that you hear would be salamun, that the salam comes from God. وكذا إذا عطس عنده عاطش شمته ثم عاد إلى الذكر. Similarly, if somebody sneezes, then you should respond. Yeah, how they sneeze, say Alhamdulillah. What we should say is Yarhamukallah. If they say Alhamdulillah, we say Yarhamukallah. May Allah have mercy on you. So again, it's something that's it's really strongly encouraged that we should. And it was such a habit for Muslims to do this, that actually even in the prayer, the fiqh books mention that sometimes people in the prayer would just sneeze and say Alhamdulillah, and somebody else would respond Yarhamukallah while he's in prayer. And they actually discuss this. Does that break your prayer or not? Yeah. That if somebody says Alhamdulillah, does it break your prayer or not? And if somebody says Yarhamukallah by mistake, does that break their prayer? So they talked about this because it was such a habitual practice of Muslims that you always were on guard, watching out. I mean, somebody once, you know, a good friend of mine who went to Mauritania once, he told me this beautiful story of how, you know, he spent some time there, and he said he was sitting in this with a group of Bedouins in Mauritania in the desert, and they had just put some food in front of him. They started eating, and he said as he would go in, he had some chicken or whatever it was, and he grabbed it with both hands, and somebody would pull his hand down, and they would just not allow him to touch the food with his left hand. And he stood there, sat there a bit confused, and then he thought, okay, well, I'll try and do it with my right hand. And as he lifted it up, the other person put his food down and started taking the pieces of meat off for him with their right hand. So it's so much embedded in their culture that you never have to use your left hand, that they all have an understanding that the moment you raise a piece of meat with your right hand, somebody else takes the meat, removes the meat off the bone for you, so that you can put that bone down and eat with your right hand. It's such it's so much part and parcel of their religion, is kind of infused in their culture, and their cultures in their religion. So these things have always been prevalent amongst Muslims, this idea of being considerate towards one another, and you know, whenever somebody sneezed, to just immediately respond, may Allah have mercy on you. When somebody gives you salam, you say wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. The hadith tells us, the Prophet tells us that if somebody gives you salam, you always give them better than what they gave you. If they say assalamu alaikum, you say wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah or wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Yeah, so you try, or at least you try to do that. So we always respond back if somebody gives salam, even if you don't like the person. You never use the salam as a way of getting back on somebody, you know. It's, you never use that as a way. Now I know that you know, sometimes the parents do this. So with children you might do it to kind of in a way to get to them. So I remember growing up, if my mom wasn't too happy with me, and I was, you know, I would say you know, I'd try and say good night to her, and she wouldn't respond to me, and then I'd repeat it again and again, and that was her way. Or if I gave salam, she wouldn't respond, and that's her way of telling me she wasn't happy. And then she once, you know, afterwards, she told me with my brother. She said, I remember he had done something, it was a long time ago, and he kept saying, and then he left, and I could tell it was bothering him. And I quietly heard my mum give the salam back, and I that was when I realized that she never once missed that salam. She always responded. She just didn't let you hear it. And I think at one point I even asked her, and she said, look, I can't not respond. This is just in, you know, as a mother, you can never do something to that extent, to not even give salam to your own child. But it was a way of, I mean, again, it shows how much this is part of our deen, that giving salam to somebody is almost can be used as a weapon. Now there's a Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah wrote, he has a section. Ibn Hajar, in fact, the hadith in Sahih Bukhari has a discussion on this. Ibn Hajar talks about this, about the importance of salam, to the extent that the scholars mentioned, what happens if a non-Muslim gives you salam? Right? What happens if a non-Muslim gives you salam? What should you do in this case? Now, we may hear that, look, you're not supposed to give salam back to him, and so on and so forth. It's not as cut and dry as that. Yeah, it's not as cut and dry as that. In fact, a lot of the scholars said you should respond with salam. The issue here is when the scholars spoke about giving salam to non-Muslims, they talked about it in a context where people would use that against you. Like the hadith, there's a hadith where a Jewish person said to the Prophet, and he said, Assalamu alaikum. Assam. Sam is sum in Arabic means poison. So Assalamu alaikum means may you be poisoned. And the Prophet ﷺ responded, wa alaikum, and upon you too. That person was expecting salam upon them, and he didn't realize the Prophet had heard exactly what he had said. He said, wa alaikum. So that became a tradition whereby if somebody gives you some, all you say is wa alaikum. You don't say wa alaikum salam. And there is a difference of opinion on this, but suffice to say, a lot of those early discussions about, you know, how you should respond to non-Muslims was based on people who were trying to deliberately misuse words and try and make fun or mock our religion by using kind of formulation that sounded like the salam, but actually were them cursing you. And for that reason, the scholars are very you know, conservative about doing this. However, lots of scholars have spoken about this and subsequently have said, even people like Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, the great Amir al-Mu'mineen, who you know, memorized over 300,000 hadiths, who's the great commentator of the Sahih Bukhari, Even he, towards the end of his discussion, does say, he says, look, if you know a non-Muslim genuinely is saying assalamu alaikum to you, if they say assalamu alaikum with that formulation, actually you should give the salam back to them. And some scholars, and he quotes them himself, he says, say that you must respond back to them, meaning the hadith of respond back with something greater doesn't end just because it's not a Muslim. Yeah. Now, these are points of difference of opinion, but just worth noting that actually it's not as cut and dry as we just don't respond to. And I know of many people that have done this, that would just ignore somebody who's non-Muslim, they give salam. Or in school, the teacher tries to be really clever and does salam to all the students, and then there's always the one kind of odd one who happens to have read a book somewhere and decides that he's not going to, or she's not going to respond back and make a big point of it. I mean, there are always all sorts of people out there, and they do fall, and they have scholars that will support that view. But on the whole, my personal view is, and my own reading of this, and a lot of the scholars I think agree with this, in that if somebody genuinely is giving salam, somebody you know, somebody you trust, somebody who's not trying to mock you, then you should give the salam, the complete salam, back to them. Even some of them said, and do more. So they say assalamu alaikum, you can respond wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah, wa rahmatullah. And what you mean by that is, of course, you're talking about in this world. So that's just something for people to be aware of. وَكَذَا إِذَا سَمِعَ الْمُؤَذِّنَ أَجَابَهُ فِي كَلِمَاتِ الْأَذَانِ وَالْإِقَامَةِ. And similarly, look, if you're doing dhikr, you're doing adhkar, and the mu'adhin starts calling for the salah, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. What we should do is, when they're doing the adhan, we should be quietly repeating it back. So when they say Allahu Akbar, we should quietly say Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, because that should be your wazifa at that time. And when he says, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, and he continues, then we should also respond back quietly. And when he gets to Hayya ala salah, Hayya ala salah, Hayya ala falah, we should be saying La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. It's called the hawqala. So for the Hanafis, that's how we respond. So if you hear Hayya ala salah, Hayya ala salah, Hayya ala falah, Hayya ala falah, we respond La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. Again, these things will be mentioned as we go through Kitab al-Adhkar. So if you're not familiar with it, don't worry. This is not an obligation in any way whatsoever. It's a recommendation, and these recommendations will all come in this book, inshallah. So we will cover a lot of this will come when we get to the Salah section. There is an Adhan section. All of these things, mashallah, are covered in this book. But anyway, the point is, as I said earlier about ilm al-hal, kind of the knowledge in that moment, which is, in that moment, what's the most appropriate thing to do? Is it to carry on reading whatever wazifa is that you're reading, or is it to stop and read the wazifa of the adhan? The appropriate thing there to do then is to respond to the adhan. So we respond back to the adhan. And like I said, if somebody sneezes, you don't just read your entire hizb and then stop, like 45 minutes later and say, Yarhamukallah, you do it immediately. ثم عاد إلى ذكر, just go back to whatever dhikr is that you're doing. وكذا إذا رأى منكرا أزاله. Similarly, if you see harm, if you see somebody is being harmed, or somebody is saying something that is harmful, for example, if you hear somebody backbiting, if you hear somebody saying something about your friend, your family, or someone that you know, something that they might not like, and you happen to be reading Quran, or you happen to be reading dhikr, the right thing to do then is, if you are able to, so in some cases you're not physically able to, and there's a hadith that tells us this. The hadith says that if you see harm happening, if you see some sort of munkar, you must try to stop it with your hands, i.e. physically stop it, do something about it. If you can't, then stop it with your tongue. And if you can't do that, then at least dislike it in your heart. Yeah. So that's down to you individually, because there are certain instances where it's very hard to speak up. Right? It's very hard to speak up, because it really depends on who it is that's doing it. And maybe you don't have the authority or the nous to be able to do anything about it, or maybe you'll cause more harm by getting involved. And that's where you have to exercise your own discretion and be appropriate about it. And it means, if if it's absolutely nothing you can do, minimally you should dislike it in your heart. And that means that you don't walk away feeling like you haven't done anything, you haven't achieved anything, or somehow you're feeling like you took the easy route. there are situations where it's very difficult to be able to do anything, or it's just not your place to do anything, which is minimally dislike it in the heart. Now, if you can do A or B, i.e., physically stop it, or with your tongue, i.e., to speak up, then you stop whatever it is that you're doing, and you do what you need to do, and you can go back to your adhkar, or whatever it is that you're doing. أو معروفا أرشد إليه. And similarly, if somebody wants help, somebody wants guidance, somebody wants a way of helping somebody, all of this is what's his name, Ibn al-Qayyim. Ibn al-Qayyim says, he says the salam and the that's what I was saying earlier, the idea of feeding people and giving salam, what's the relation, what are the two things, what do the two things have in common? He says the two things what they have in common is the fact that both feeding and giving salam is about community. It's about doing what will be good for the community. So idea of salam literally means peace. It means spreading love, it's compassion, harmony, friendship. So salam is not just a word, it's actually what it represents. It represents, just like, look, if somebody gives salam to you, you immediately, you look to them and you feel like they've whoever they are, you want to respond back to them, but they've initiated a conversation with you, so you'll give them your attention. It almost, the person who gives salam is it's always hard to be the one that initiates the salam. So when someone does that for you, if you don't know a group of people and one person initiates salam and looks to you and gives you salam, you immediately feel like you're included. So it's quite it's an amazing thing to do. It's a very important thing to do. And in the context in which the Prophet speaks about this in a lot of detail is in Medina, where the Muslims have now encountered a group of people, who the Ansar, who they don't know very well, they haven't grown up around, and the Prophet encouraging them to build these bonds of brotherhood and sisterhood. And the way that's done is through this idea of salam, spreading peace, spreading salam, spreading love between them all. And then also doing that also, وَأَطْعِمُوا الطَّعَامَ, and to feed people. In other words, that's another way of building love and showing your consideration and demonstrating your love for the community and the fact that you're a part of that community. Because when you take on some of the kind of burdens of the community, what you're doing is you're showing the people around you that you not only care for them as an outsider, but you're part of that community, and their problems are your problems. So this is the kind of the link between giving salam and feeding people. وكذا إذا رأى منكرا أزاله أو معروفا أرشد إليه أو مسترشدا أجابه ثم عاد إلى الذكر. He says, he said, if somebody comes to you asking for help or directions or anything like that, if somebody comes to you personally and asks you about for help, so the first is you prevent some harm happening. The second is, you could say, where there's good somewhere, right? There is good somewhere. O ma'rufun arshada ilayhi, o mustarshidan. So where you direct somebody towards something good. And the third situation is where somebody themselves, you need some help or direction or something that you meaning you're involved in a. I mean, all these three things represent the same thing, which is that all of these things, which is you judge things by the moment and you look at which one is more important. ثم عاد إلى ذكر, then you go back to the dhikr. كذا إذا غلبه النعاس أو نحوه وما أشبه هذا كله. And he said, similarly, if you happen to be really tired, falling asleep, these sorts of things, he said, look, you have to give your body rights too. So if you're finding yourself falling unconscious, then go to sleep. He said, so you have to, and he does say that all of these things will be discussed in more detail when the time comes. فصل يعلم أن الأذكار مشروعة في الصلاة وغيرها واجبة كانت أو مستحبة لا يحسب شيء منها ولا يعتد به حتى يتلفظ به بحيث يسمع نفسه إذا كان صحيح السمع لا عارض له. He then goes on to another, he only mentioned a couple of words here, but there's a lot packed into this. So I'm not going to even attempt to try and go through this next section today. So I don't think we'll, inshallah, next week it looks like we're going to complete the preamble of the Shaykh. All right, then let's stop there, inshallah. Hopefully it's been beneficial, and I shall see you all very soon. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.